The wind howled like a pack of wolves, tearing across the mountain pass with claws of ice. Snow fell thick and relentless, swallowing every trail, every landmark, until the world itself seemed to vanish into a blur of white. The young woman stumbled through the drifts, her thin boots soaked, her breath coming in ragged clouds that froze the instant they touched the air. Each step felt heavier than the last, as though the storm itself wanted her buried beneath it. Behind her lay the faint imprint of wagon wheels and boot tracks the people she had once called her own. They hadn't even looked back when they left her. The memory stabbed deeper than the cold. One moment she had been among them, clinging to the hope that together they would survive this journey. The next, harsh words had been thrown at her. She's slowing us down. She won't last the night. Better her than all of us. She had begged. Her voice, hoarse and desperate, had pleaded for one more chance to keep pace, to prove she wasn't as weak as they claimed. But no one listened. They had turned their faces away from her cries, eyes hard, hearts harder. The snow swallowed the sound of wagon wheels creaking away, until all that was left was silence and the keening of the wind. Now, hours later, the weight of that abandonment pressed on her chest more cruelly than the cold. She staggered forward, clutching at her threadbare shawl, though it did nothing to protect her from the icy gusts. Her hands were numb, her lips cracked, her lashes crusted with frozen tears. Every breath seared her lungs, as if the air itself cut her from within. Her body ached, but it was her heart that throbbed most violently. How could they have left her? She was not a stranger. She had shared bread with them, laughed around their fires, whispered prayers beneath the same night sky. And yet, when survival turned cruel, she had become nothing but weight to be cast aside. A stumble sent her crashing into the snow, her palms sinking into its biting chill. She lay there for a moment, gasping, her cheek pressed against the frozen ground. The thought crept in, uninvited, that perhaps this was easier. To stop fighting, to let the snow cover her until she became part of the mountain itself. The storm would cradle her, and her suffering would be over. Her eyes fluttered shut. Darkness pressed at the edges of her vision. She thought of home, not the cruel faces of those who had abandoned her, but a smaller, humbler memory. A cabin lit by firelight, laughter spilling from its walls, the smell of warm bread and pine smoke in the air. A place where love lived. It wasn't real anymore, not in this life, but the memory clung stubbornly to her heart. The wind roared louder as if mocking her weakness. Her breaths grew shallow. She couldn't feel her feet, nor the snow clinging to her hair and lashes. Time blurred. She wasn't sure if minutes or hours passed. Only the storm remained, unyielding. But then, amid the shrieking wind, something changed. A shadow moved across the whiteness. At first, she thought it was a trick of her mind, a final dream before death. But no, the crunch of boots on snow was too heavy, too real. The silhouette drew closer, broad-shouldered, moving with the steady confidence of someone who belonged in this wilderness. Fear and hope tangled in her chest. She tried to lift her head, but her body no longer obeyed. Through the veil of falling snow, she saw the figure stop, crouched down beside her. A gloved hand brushed the snow from her cheek, rough yet startlingly gentle. Her lips parted, but no sound came. Her body was too weak, her voice lost to the storm. Still, her eyes flickered open long enough to catch the stranger's face. Rugged, weathered by years of survival, with eyes sharp as flint yet softened by something she couldn't name. She thought she heard him speak, a deep, steady voice carried just above the howl of the wind. The words were faint, almost lost to the storm, but they wrapped around her like warmth. "Don't give up. I've got you now." Her mind slipped again into darkness, but this time she didn't feel entirely alone. When she woke again, it was to the sound of fire. Not the crackle of a hearth she remembered from childhood, but a rougher, wilder blaze, the kind built in haste to fight back a killing cold. For a moment, she thought she had crossed into another world, some thin place between life and death. Her body lay swaddled in blankets she didn't recognize, the air around her warmer than it had been in days, but her throat burned like ash and her lips were cracked dry. She was alive. Barely. Her eyes fluttered open, and there he was. The man she had glimpsed in the snowstorm was no vision, no ghost, but flesh and blood. He sat close to the fire, his back straight, shoulders broad beneath a heavy fur cloak. The flames danced across his face, carving shadows into hard lines of a man who had lived too long under open skies. His jaw was rough with a beard touched with frost, his hair dark and unkempt. Yet it was his eyes that struck her most. They were the color of storm clouds, steady, watching her with a mixture of wariness and something deeper, something almost protective. She tried to speak, but her voice was no stronger than a whisper. "Where?" "Safe enough," he said, his voice low, quiet as if speaking too loud might shatter her. "You were near gone when I found you. Another hour in that snow, and—" His words trailed off. He didn't need to finish. Her mind reeled back to the storm, to the memory of the wagon disappearing, to the faces that had abandoned her. Her breath hitched. "They left me." The words cracked like glass, fragile and broken. The man's eyes narrowed slightly, though his expression didn't change. "I figured as much. No one wanders that high alone." He shifted closer, kneeling by her side, and held out a tin cup of steaming broth. "Drink, slow. It'll sit heavy, but it'll keep you." Her fingers trembled as she reached for it. The cup was warm, almost painfully so, against her frostbitten hands. She tried to lift it herself, but her strength failed, and the liquid sloshed dangerously close to spilling. Without a word, he steadied her hands with his own, calloused palms guiding the cup to her lips. The broth slid down her throat, hot and savory, sending sparks of life through her veins. She coughed, choked a little, but the man didn't flinch, only tilted the cup more carefully. When at last she managed to drink enough, he set it aside, his movements precise, practiced. "Why?" The question escaped her lips before she could stop it. Her voice was hoarse but desperate. "Why save me?" He leaned back on his heels, studying her as though weighing the answer. The firelight glinted in his eyes, and for the briefest moment, the mask of a hardened mountain man slipped. "Because no one deserves to die that way," he said simply. Then, after a pause, softer. "Not alone. Not in the snow." Her chest tightened, a knot of grief and gratitude swelling until she thought it might break her ribs. She wanted to ask his name, to know who the stranger was who had plucked her from death's arms. But exhaustion dragged at her once more. Her eyelids drooped, and the warmth of the blanket seemed to sink deeper into her bones. As she drifted, she felt his presence beside her, solid and unmoving, like the mountain itself. She thought she heard him murmur something, words she could barely catch, words that sounded like a promise. "You're not going to die out here. I'll take you home." Sleep claimed her then, heavier than any snowfall. But for the first time since the storm began, her dreams carried a flicker of warmth, a fragile spark of hope. Outside, the storm raged on, battering the mountain. But within that small circle of firelight, two souls, one broken, one hardened, had begun to cross paths in a way neither yet understood. When she woke again, the cabin was dark except for the glow of embers, their faint orange light flickering across the wooden walls. The storm outside still rumbled, muffled now by heavy logs and thick drifts piled against the cabin. For a moment she lay still, cocooned in blankets that smelled faintly of smoke and pine, unsure if she was dreaming or alive. Her body was sore, but the bone-deep ache of freezing had lessened. She could feel her toes again tingling painfully, but they were hers. Her chest rose and fell in slow, steady breaths. Life had returned, however fragile. Then she heard it. Not the fire, not the storm, but a voice. A low murmur, gravelly and warm, carrying through the small room. It took her a moment to realize it was him, the mountain man. She turned her head slightly, and there he was, sitting by the door with a rifle across his knees, keeping silent watch. The firelight painted his face in shadow and gold. She couldn't make out all of what he said at first. His voice was more like a rumble than clear speech, but there was a rhythm to it, a cadence that wrapped around her heart like a cloak. Her breath caught as she realized he wasn't talking to himself. He was talking to her. "You've been through hell," he whispered, not looking at her but at the flames. "But you're still here. Stronger than you think. You'll see." Her eyes stung, though whether from the smoke or the ache in her soul, she didn't know. Something in his voice so steady, so certain broke through the wall of despair that had been closing around her since the moment she was left behind. She shifted slightly, the blanket rustling. His head turned toward her. "You're awake." His tone was calm, but his eyes flickered with relief. He set the rifle aside and moved to crouch near her. "How do you feel?" Her throat tightened. She wanted to tell him everything, that she felt broken, hollow, abandoned beyond repair. But all she managed was a rasped, "Alive." A corner of his mouth lifted, just enough to be almost a smile. "That's something." He reached for the tin cup again, filling it with water from a pot near the fire. "Drink, you'll need strength." This time, her hands were steadier, though his calloused ones still lingered to make sure she didn't spill. She drank slowly, the cool water easing her parched throat. When she lowered the cup, her eyes lifted to his. You said something. Before." Her voice was soft, hesitant, like stepping onto fragile ice. "Out there. In the snow." He looked at her for a long moment, then nodded. "I said I'd take you home." The words hung between them, heavy with meaning. She blinked hard, tears threatening to spill. "I don't have a home." "Not anymore." He didn't look away. His gaze was steady, unflinching, as if he'd heard confessions like this before. "Then we'll find one. Or make one. But you won't die in the snow. Not while I'm breathing." Her heart clenched, too fragile to believe, too desperate not to. The sincerity in his tone, so absolute, so grounded, was unlike anything she'd ever heard. Not pity, not empty comfort. A promise. She turned her face away, unable to bear the weight of it. The fire popped, sending sparks into the air. For the first time since the storm, warmth seeped deeper than her skin, into the hollow places of her soul. Silence stretched between them, but it wasn't cold or cruel. It was steady, like the mountain itself. His presence filled the room, an anchor against the storm still raging beyond the walls. When exhaustion tugged at her again, her body sinking deeper into the blankets, she caught one last murmur from him. Words spoken so softly she almost believed she dreamed them. "Rest easy. You're safe. I'll carry you the rest of the way." And this time, when sleep claimed her, it was not with fear or despair. It was with the faint, impossible sense that maybe, just maybe, she wasn't alone anymore. Morning came late in the mountains. When she opened her eyes, the light seeping through the cracks in the log walls was thin and pale, filtered by clouds still heavy with snow. The storm had not passed, but in here, the world felt different, quieter, almost hushed. The fire in the stone hearth had burned low, but it still glowed, casting a steady heat that wrapped around her aching body. The mountain man was already up. She could hear him outside, the crunch of his boots in the snow, the steady chop of an axe against wood. Each swing echoed through the cabin walls like the heartbeat of this place, strong and dependable. She lay still, listening, absorbing the simple rhythm of survival. Her body hurt, stiff and sore, but it was the kind of ache that came from waking after rest, not from dying. She tried to sit up. The blanket slipped from her shoulders and cold air bit at her skin. She shivered, pulling it tighter around her, but determination pushed her onward. She refused to be a helpless burden, not again. By the time he came back in, arms loaded with split logs, she was upright, her back pressed against the rough-hewn wall. He paused, snow dusting his hair and beard, and gave her a look that was neither surprise nor annoyance. "Just quiet assessment. You shouldn't be up yet," he said, setting the wood beside the hearth. Her voice was still hoarse, but steadier than before. "I can't lie here forever." He didn't argue. Instead, he crouched to stoke the fire, stacking the wood so the flames roared back to life. "You'll eat first," he said, his tone final, like an order. "Then we'll see about standing." A small pot simmered on the edge of the hearth, sending the smell of stew into the air rich with rabbit meat and wild herbs. When he ladled some into a bowl and set it in her hands, the warmth seeped into her fingers before she even tasted it. The broth was salty and strong, the meat tender. Each bite sent life into her bones. She nearly wept from the simple act of eating, of being nourished. "You'll need to keep food down," he said, settling into a chair across from her, arms crossed. "The cold takes more than you realize. Steals your strength before you feel it." She nodded, too focused on her meal to answer. But gratitude filled her chest until it was almost painful. No one had ever looked at her survival as worth this much effort. When the bowl was empty, he took it without a word and set it aside. Then he straightened. "Come," her brow furrowed. "Where?" "To the fire. You need to feel your legs again." He extended a hand. She hesitated. Trust did not come easily anymore, not after being abandoned. But the steadiness in his eyes, calm, unwavering, gave her courage. Slowly, she set her hand in his. His palm was rough, warm, calloused from years of work, but it held hers as though it were something fragile. He helped her to her feet. Her knees wobbled, her body protesting, but he stood close, an anchor against her weakness. Step by step, she shuffled to the fire. The heat licked at her skin, driving away the last ghosts of the storm's chill. Her legs trembled beneath her, but he didn't let go. "You'll walk again," he murmured, steady as stone. "The body remembers. Give it time." She met his gaze, and for a moment, words stuck in her throat. No one had ever spoken to her like that, not as though she was fragile glass ready to break, but as though she was strong enough to rise again. By the time he guided her back to the bed, her body was trembling from exhaustion, but her spirit felt strangely lighter. She had taken her first steps back toward life. Later, as he worked by the fire repairing a snare, checking a knife's edge, she found herself watching him. Every movement was precise, efficient, born of necessity. He was a man who had carved a life from the wilderness, not because it was easy, but because it was the only way. And yet, beneath that hardened exterior, there was something else. Something that had carried her through the storm when no one else would. The cabin creaked in the wind, snow piling higher against its walls. Outside, the world was still a frozen prison. But inside, she realized survival was possible. For the first time in a long time, she allowed herself to believe in tomorrow. The days passed slowly in the cabin, measured not by clocks, but by the rise and fall of the fire, the rhythm of chopping wood, and the simple ritual of meals. Outside, the snow kept falling, each storm erasing the tracks of the last. The mountains seemed endless, merciless. Yet inside, there was warmth, a fragile circle of safety carved out of wilderness and willpower. She was stronger now. Each day, he pushed her, gently helping her walk across the room, steadying her when her legs faltered, showing her how to stretch her stiff hands back into life. She hated the weakness, the way her body betrayed her, but he never sighed, never grew impatient. He only stood nearby, silent and solid, catching her if she stumbled out. It was during one of those walks, when she managed to reach the cabin's narrow window, that the memories spilled out. She had been holding them in, afraid that speaking would make the pain too sharp, too real. But the sight of the snow outside, the endless white expanse, so much like the day they left her, broke something loose inside. "They didn't even say goodbye," she whispered, her hand trembling on the window frame. The mountain man looked up from where he was mending a leather strap. He didn't speak, only waited. His stillness made her feel as though there was space enough for her words. "They said I was slowing them down," she continued, her voice bitter and raw. "That the horses couldn't spare the weight. That I was too weak to make it. So they chose to leave me, just like that, as if I was nothing." Her breath shuddered, fogging the glass. She swallowed hard, but the tears came anyway, hot and blinding. "I begged them," she said, her voice cracking. "I begged them not to leave me. I told them I could keep up, I'd try harder. But they just—" She broke off, pressing her fist to her mouth. Silence stretched between them, broken only by the hiss of the fire. She didn't dare look at him. She was afraid of what she might see: pity, disgust, or worse, agreement. But when he finally spoke, his voice was low, steady, carrying a weight of his own. "They were cowards," he said, her head jerked up, startled. His eyes were on her now, storm-dark and fierce. "Cowards leave a woman to die in the snow. Cowards choose their own ease over decency." His jaw tightened, and for a moment she saw the shadow of rage flicker across his face. Not at her. At them the tears fell faster, but they were different now, less of grief, more of release. Someone believed her. Someone saw her worth, even when those who should have protected her had not. He stood, walked to the fire, and tossed another log into the flames. Sparks flew upward, scattering like fireflies. For a long time he stared into the blaze, his hands braced on his knees. Then, without turning, he said, "You're not the only one who's been left behind." The words sank into her chest like stones into water. She waited, hardly daring to breathe. "I had a family once," he went on, voice rougher now. "A wife. A son. The sickness came one winter, and the town buried them before spring. I went to the mountains because there was nothing left for me anywhere else. No faces I wanted to see. No voices I could stand to hear." She closed her eyes, her heart aching. She hadn't expected this, hadn't thought this man so unyielding, so carved from stone, could carry a wound so deep. "I don't talk about them," he said after a long pause. "Don't see the use. The world's full of graves. But when I saw you lying in the snow," his voice dropped, softer now, "I couldn't leave you there. Not the way I found them. Not alone." Her breath caught, the pieces of his silence fitting together at last. This wasn't just about mercy. This was about him, too, the ghosts he carried, the promises he could never keep to those he'd already lost. She wanted to reach out, to lay her hand over his and let him know she understood. But the weight of the moment held her still. Instead, she whispered, "Thank you for not leaving me." His eyes met hers across the fire. For the first time, she thought she saw something unspoken there, not just determination, but connection. A fragile bond, forged not from chance, but from shared wounds. The storm outside battered the walls, as if it wanted to break them both. But in the heart of that small cabin, for the first time in years, she felt less like a burden and more like someone worth saving. The storm did not relent. Days blurred into weeks, the snow piling higher until the world beyond the cabin was nothing but a white wall pressing against the windows. The mountain had become a prison, but a strangely merciful one, for within its icy hold, they were left with no choice but to endure together. The rhythm of survival became their language. Each morning he would rise before dawn, his boots crunching across the floor as he stepped outside to check traps. CHOP wood, or sweep snow from the roof before it caved. She would wake to the sound of his work, the steady cadence of a man who belonged to the land. At first, she could do little but watch. Her body, still weak from frostbite and hunger, fought against her will. But he never let her sink into despair. If she could walk from the bed to the fire without stumbling, he nodded as though she had conquered a mountain. If she managed to help stir the pot or fold blankets, he treated it like a victory. "You're healing," he would say, simple and matter of fact. "Each day's better than the last. That's how it works." And slowly she began to believe him. By the second week, she insisted on helping more. She learned to mend the torn seams of his gloves, her stitches uneven at first but steadier with practice. He showed her how to cut strips of bark to start fires, how to stack wood so it burned hotter, how to stir stew so it didn't scorch at the bottom. Small things, but each one gave her a sense of belonging, of purpose. One morning, when he returned with a rabbit caught in a snare, she surprised him by asking to help skin it. His brow had furrowed as if expecting her to flinch. But when her hands shook, she steadied them, refusing to back down. He guided her through it, his large hands moving over hers, his voice calm and patient. When the task was done, he gave her the faintest of nods, pride unspoken but clear. Nights were different, quieter, softer. After supper, when the fire burned low and the world outside was nothing but darkness, they spoke in fragments. She told him of the town she had come from, of the way people's kindness had thinned when winter grew harsh. She confessed her dreams, that once she had wanted a home filled with music and laughter, not just survival. He listened, never interrupting. When he spoke, his words were fewer but heavy with truth. He told her about the son he had lost, the way the boy had laughed like summer rain, the way silence had swallowed the cabin after sickness took him. His voice cracked only once, but that was enough to make her throat tighten with tears. It wasn't romance, yet not in the way stories told it. It was something quieter, forged in necessity and the simple act of seeing one another. In the way he always placed the warmer blanket over her side of the bedroll, though he never admitted it. In the way she mended his torn shirt without being asked, her fingers brushing over the fabric as if it was something sacred. There were moments when their eyes met across the fire, and the silence between them grew heavy, charged. She would look away first, heart pounding, unsure of what had shifted inside her. But the warmth lingered, and she carried it with her like a hidden ember. One evening, after she managed to carry an armful of kindling from the woodpile to the fire, she collapsed into a chair, laughing breathlessly. He stood there, arms folded, watching her with that steady gaze. "What?" she asked, smiling despite herself. "Nothing," he said. But then, after a pause, his voice softened. "It's good to hear you laugh." Her smile faltered into something more fragile, more real. She turned to the fire, afraid he would see the way her cheeks flushed. Yet inside, something bloomed of fragile hope, delicate as spring flowers beneath the snow. The cabin had begun as a place of survival. Now it was becoming something more. Not just a refuge from the storm, but a space where two broken souls found themselves piecing life back together, one quiet day at a time. And though neither dared to say it aloud, they both knew the snow had not only taken, it had given. In the heart of winter, they were no longer entirely alone. The storm finally broke. It happened one morning when the cabin awoke not to the sound of howling winds, but to silence. A heavy silence, the kind that pressed against the ears and made the world feel new. She pushed herself up from the bed, heart hammering. Through the frost-laced window, she saw sunlight spilling over the mountains, dazzling against endless fields of snow. The storm had passed at last, leaving the world sharp and bright. Like a blade honed to perfection. She should have felt only relief, but dread coiled in her belly. The storm's prison had been safe in its way. No, past, no faces, just survival. Now, beyond the glittering drifts, her ghosts waited. He must have sensed her unease. The mountain man stood at the door, adjusting the rifle slung over his shoulder. His voice was quiet but firm. The way's clear enough to travel now. Her hands tightened in her lap. Travel where? He studied her, his expression unreadable. Back down the mountain. To the ones who left you. You'll have to face them. The words hit her like a blow. She shook her head, her voice breaking. I don't want to see them. Not ever again. He stepped closer, crouching so his eyes met hers. They were steady, unflinching, as though he carried enough strength for both of them. You can't run from what they did. If you don't face them, their voices will follow you. Every time you close your eyes, you'll hear them leaving you behind. Her throat tightened, tears burning. She wanted to argue, to tell him he didn't understand, but she knew he did. She had seen it in the way his voice cracked when he spoke of his wife and son, in the way he carried his grief like a stone in his chest. He knew ghosts. He lived with them. He reached out, his hand rough but gentle as it closed around hers. You won't face them alone. I'll be there. The promise was simple, but it cut through her fear like sunlight through clouds. She nodded, trembling, and for the first time since that day in the snow, she felt ready. The journey down was slow, treacherous even in calm weather. He led the way, his stride steady and sure, cutting a path through drifts that still reached her waist. Whenever she stumbled, he was there, his hand closing around hers, his voice urging her forward. By the time they reached the valley, her legs shook with exhaustion. Yet when smoke curled from chimneys ahead, her chest tightened not from weariness, but from dread. The town, the people who had left her, they saw her before she was ready. Faces turned, eyes widened. A hush fell over the street as if the dead had walked among them. She felt every stare like a stone hurled against her skin. Her breath came ragged, panic clawing at her throat. Then she felt his hand at her back, steady, grounding. He stepped forward, his voice deep and unwavering. You left her to die. Gasps rippled through the crowd. One of the men, broad-shouldered and red-faced, spat into the snow. She was weak. We had no choice. Better one gone than all of us. Her vision blurred with fury. Weak. That word again, the one that had condemned her. She opened her mouth, but no sound came. Shame tried to choke her. Before it could, the mountain man's voice cut through the silence, sharp as an axe. She's stronger than any of you. Stronger than cowards who abandon their own. She walked through death's door and lived. That's more than you can say. The man's face darkened, but no one else spoke. Some lowered their eyes, guilt burning in their expressions. Others shifted uncomfortably, unable to meet her gaze. Finally, she found her voice. It trembled at first, then grew steadier. You left me. You decided I wasn't worth the trouble. But I lived. I lived without you. And I don't need you now. The words left her shaking, but they felt like steel in her bones. She didn't wait for their response. She turned and walked away, her feet crunching in the snow, her heart thundering. He followed, silent, close as a shadow. When they were beyond the edge of town, she stopped, chest heaving. The cold air stung her cheeks, but it felt clean, cleansing. She looked at him, her voice barely more than a whisper. It's over. He studied her, then nodded. It's over. For the first time since that terrible day in the snow, she believed it. The town faded behind them, swallowed by snow and distance, until only the crunch of their boots and the call of a raven broke the silence. She didn't look back. She didn't need to. What lingered there, the betrayal, the abandonment, no longer bound her. She had faced it, spoken her truth, and walked away. Now, every step forward was her own. The mountain man walked beside her, steady and unhurried. as though the world could move at its own pace and he would never falter. His presence was an anchor, his silence a shield. She caught herself glancing at him often, studying the way his breath misted in the air, the way his shoulders seemed broad enough to hold the sky. "You kept your promise," she said at last. Her voice soft but sure. He turned to her, his brow furrowed. "Which one?" "You said I wouldn't face them alone." "You were right there." She let out a shaky laugh. "You always are." His eyes softened, lines crinkling at their edges. For a moment, she thought he might speak, but he only gave a small nod and looked ahead again, as though afraid his voice might betray more than he wanted to share. By the time they reached his cabin, dusk had settled over the peaks. The sky blazed orange and purple, and the snow gleamed like glass. Smoke curled from the chimney, a familiar sight now, but it no longer felt like a stranger's home. It felt like safety. She paused at the threshold, her hand brushing the doorframe. Once she had crossed into this cabin as a half-dead girl, carried in his arms, her body too broken to stand. Now she stepped through on her own, her spine straight, her heart lighter than it had been in months. He followed her in, setting his rifle against the wall and stoking the fire back to life. The flames caught quickly, filling the room with warmth and shadows that danced across the log walls. For a long while, neither of them spoke. She sat at the table, watching the flames lick higher, listening to the faint crackle of pine. He moved with the ease of habit, placing wood, hanging his coat, pouring water into the kettle. It was an ordinary rhythm, but to her it felt extraordinary. At last she broke the silence. "I thought home was where you were born, where your people are." Her fingers traced the grain of the wood beneath her. "But I don't have that anymore. Not after what they did." He paused, his back to her, shoulders heavy. When he turned, his face was shadowed, but his eyes were clear. "Home isn't where you're born. It's where you're seen, where you're safe." His voice dipped, almost a whisper. "Where someone stays." The words struck deep, soft, and uncheckable. She blinked hard, fighting the sting in her eyes. "And this feels like that," she whispered. Something shifted in his gaze then, something raw, something unguarded. Slowly, as though afraid of breaking the moment, he crossed the room and sat opposite her. His hands, scarred and strong, rested on the table. One reached toward hers, hesitating only a heartbeat before curling around her fingers. Her breath caught. His touch was warm, grounding, the same way it had been when he first pulled her out of the snow. Only now it wasn't about survival. It was about belonging. "You're not alone anymore," he said simply. The tears came then, hot and unstoppable, but they weren't born of pain. They were release, relief. She leaned forward, pressing her forehead against his hand, letting herself feel the truth of his promise. The storm had tried to claim her. The people she trusted had abandoned her. But the mountain had given her something greater, someone who whispered, "I'll take you home," and meant it. And now, as the fire burned low and the night pressed close, she realized that home wasn't a place at all. It was here, in this cabin, in the warmth of his voice, in the steady strength of his hand wrapped around hers. It was him. And for the first time since she'd been left in the snow, she let herself breathe freely. She was no longer lost. She was home.